Chess YouTube, what is happening? In this video, Magnus Carlsen, the GOAT, he shows step by step how to simply obliterate the King's Indian defense right here, which is one of the oldest, strongest, and most common openings for black at all levels of the game. And by the way, it was a favorite of Hikaru, Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov, and many other legends of the game. Now, this right here is the King's Indian. Black's setup is very, very simple. He goes knight f6, g6, and bishop g7, intending short castling on the next move. Beyond that, he may intend moves like d6 and then c5 or e5, counterattacking in the center. And overall, it's a very strong and flexible response to 1d4 from white. Now, let's go back to the very beginning. In the game, Magnus here plays 1d4, and black does go knight f6. And again, the King's Indian is a very good response to 1d4 specifically. Magnus here continues c4, and black does go g6. Now, the one big drawback of the King's Indian is it does give white ultimate flexibility to choose whatever setup he wants versus black. He can control the center, he can fianchetto his bishop, he can go for an f3, e4 setup. There are so many ways to play here as white. For example, knight c3, intending e4 is very, very good. f3, intending e4 is a favorite of mine and also very, very good. g3, intending the fianchetto is very, very good. Well, I can even go h4 here, a ridiculous move, but it turns out it's one of the top engine lines here. Crazy stuff. In the game, though, Magnus does go for the old main line versus the King's Indian. He begins knight c3, and black does go bishop g7, the King's Indian move. Instead, d5 would be a Grunfeld defense, the other main idea here for black. But instead, bishop g7 chosen in the game. By the way, this game took place this past week in the Titled Tuesday tournament on chess.com. Magnus here facing off versus a very strong GM, Sina Mohavid, I believe is how you say his name. Now, from here, Magnus, he continues, e4. The main idea, gaining space and getting a trifecta of very strong pawns on e4, d4, and the c4 squares, which control literally all of the very important central squares in the game. Now, black continues, d6, an important move. At some point, white was threatening e5, pushing back that knight on f6 in the spirit of the Alekhines opening after 1e4. Therefore, black does go d6, guarding e5. Now here, if white wanted to go e5, that would not be a good idea at all, as black would trade on e5 and then trade queens, and black would get a fantastic position as white's king cannot castle on d1. So heading back here, in this position, Magnus, how does he want to continue? There are probably a dozen different ways to proceed. For example, white can go for a Makhachkov with a fast h3. He can go for a 4-pawns attack. He can go for a same-ish setup. But in the game, Magnus here goes for the old main line, the so-called classical variation, starting with knight to f3. And this really is Magnus Carlsen's main weapon versus the King's Indian these days. It's pretty much all he plays these days. And the basic idea is to go knight f3, bishop e2, and then short castles, getting a very, very solid, weakness-free position as white. And from there, it all depends on how black proceeds himself. Now, in the game, we continue. Short castles, bishop e2, and then e5, a very standard idea in the King's Indian. Now, Magnus castles, and here black has a wide range of options. He can, for example, trade on d4, he can go a5, or knight to a6, or knight b d7, or perhaps queen to e8 or rook e8. But in the game here, black goes for the old main line, the so-called Mar Del Plata variation of the King's Indian, and that is with the move knight to c6. Now, entire books have been written about this move right here, as it leads to some of the most complicated, interesting, and complex positions in all of chess if white plays the main line. And Magnus, he's up for it. He plays the move d5, gaining space in the center, driving back this knight, and black goes back to the e7 square with the knight. Now, this right here is one of the most famous positions in all of chess, and really, both sides will be attacking all out on opposite sides of the board. Black here, his main idea is to start a kingside attack with moves like, for example, knight to h5, f5, and maybe later f4, intending g5, g4. White, on the other hand, at some point is going to want to push c5, maybe with b4 included, and attack on the queen side. And both sides, they're basically all in. Neither side can slow down. Both sides attacking all out on opposite sides of the board. All right, from here, Magnus, how does he want to proceed? There are a few different options. For example, you can go knight to e1 or knight d2. Those are the old main lines of this variation. But in the game, Magnus here, he plays a move that was popularized around the 80s and the 90s of the last century, and that is the so-called bayonet attack with the move b4. Now, this move is ultra aggressive. White is going for essentially the fastest possible c5 break on the queen side. And of course, c5 is the key pawn break for white in general in this position. However, the drawback of this is the knight is still on the f3 square, meaning white later cannot go f3, bolstering his e4 pawn. Now, white's going to have some ideas. Later, he may actually jump to the g5 square with that knight, depending on what black does. More on that in just a little bit. Now, here, black, he continues with the most aggressive option humanly possible. That is knight to h5, intending a fast f5. Again, a standard idea in the King's Indian defense. But Magnus, he is not concerned at all. And here he's got a few different ideas. Black's big threat is knight to f4, trying to win the very important light square bishop of white. And white here has got a few different ways to respond. For example, g3, guarding f4 is very common. And white could also ignore the threat and simply attack on the queen side with either c5 or a4. Instead, Magnus here plays maybe the most solid option overall, that is simply rook to e1. And the idea behind this move is very simple. If black does jump in with the knight to the f4 square, Magnus will go bishop f1, and the bishop, surprisingly, will do a fantastic job of defending g2 and sort of h3 later in the game. And that is what happens. Here, black goes knight f4, attacking the bishop, and Magnus, he simply slides back. Bishop f1 is the move, guarding g2, and sort of indirectly guarding h3. For example, if white were to go h3 later, that pawn would be sort of indirectly supported by the bishop, and that is important if black were to, say, sacrifice a piece on the h3 square later. Now here, how does black want to continue? Well, black here is all out of knight tricks, and he plays the standard idea for black in the King's Indian. That is the move f5. Here we go. Magnus, this guy is not phased at all. He plays a very curious move, a4, expanding on the queen side. Now, why would Magnus here play the move a4 instead of perhaps the more standard-looking c5? After all, c5 is kind of the key idea for white in general in this structure. What is Magnus doing? Well, don't worry, Magnus here, he has a very specific idea in mind that leads to an absolutely insane middle game. All right. Black here, h6 is the move, guarding g5. Knight g5 is a very common resource for white in the Bayonett Attack, with the idea being knight g5 and later sacrificing the knight on e6 with knight d6. So h6 here is simply designed to stop knight g5 ideas from white later in the game, stopping that sort of knight jump sacrifice. Now here, Magnus, on move 13, he busts out his simply ludicrous idea. Rook to a3. Magnus here, the rook lift on the third rank. What he's trying to do, he's trying to defend along the entire third rank with the rook from the queen side. All right, black here, g5 is the move, gaining even more space, continuing the attack. And now Magnus, he initiates massive complications on the king side with the move g3. And we're seeing how important it is to have that light squared bishop on the f1 square. On f1, the bishop guards h3, meaning g3 now hits the knight, and the knight does not have access to h3. So we're seeing all of Carlsen's moves here sort of working together, synergizing absolutely perfectly so far in this game. Now, black here, he does not move his knight on the f4 square, and he initiates massive complications himself with the move f takes e4, attacking the knight on the f3 square. Now, both knights here are technically hanging, and beyond that, black has some pressure on the knight on f3 with the rook from the f8 square. So things are just massively complicated. Magnus here, he simply needs to calculate everything out as far as he can here. And in this position, the strongest move here is actually knight takes e4. But instead of that, Magnus, he plays the move knight takes g5. What on earth is the idea behind this move? Well, as we're going to see, this move right here makes full use of the rook on the a3 square. Magnus is trying to do everything he can to slip this rook all the way over to the king side. Let's see how it happens. Black here, he takes on g5. Magnus takes on f4. There's nothing else. Black takes back, and then knight takes e4. Okay, let's slow down here and do inventory. Magnus here has the wonderful e4 square for the knights, and beyond that, the rook on the a3 square can now slide all the way over to h3 if he wants to later in the game. Of course, black is not without his benefits. He has very strong pawns on d5 and the e5 and the f4 squares, and potentially a big attack on the king's side. So Magnus here is sort of slowing down with his intentions of attacking on the queen's side, and he might be focusing on the king's side from now. All right, here, Sina Mohamed, he plays the move knight to g6. The right idea, but maybe a little bit imprecise. Instead, knight to f5 was a little bit better, with the knight eyeing more center squares like d4 and so on. Instead, knight g6 played in the game. The idea being he's trying to open up scope for his queen to fly all the way down, potentially to the h4 square. Also, the knight eyeing h4 as well. Now, Magnus, queen to h5. Stopping queen to h4 ideas dead in its tracks. The queen being very, very active on h5. I call it the Hikaru queen, as Hikaru famously went e4, e5, and then queen to h5 in his youth in a lot of games as white. So the Hikaru queen on the h5 square, eyeing the weak knight on g6, and black here is going to have to defend that knight somehow, some way. Magnus finding ways to apply just relentless pressure onto his opponents all throughout this game. All right, black. He's got to find some way to defend. How do you want to deal with this threat? Well, it turns out the strongest way to defend is to develop another piece with the move bishop f5. A very logical move, defending the knight, pressuring this knight, and so on. Developing and defending and attacking. Hard to go wrong with that. Instead, in the game, black here plays the move knight to h4. And this move right here is actually a massive strategic mistake. Now, Magnus here, this guy goes completely off the deep end and plays an absolutely absurd move. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to figure out what on earth Magnus has in mind right now, right here in this position. And by the way, guys, real fast, if you are watching endless YouTube videos and not making any real progress with your online chess, trust me, I know the feeling and I have the solution. Personally, I went from 1,100 ELO to over 2,000 ELO in just 7 months in the past year. I know how to make screaming fast progress, and my students in my free online community, drmikechess.com, they're making insane progress as well. I have so many guys making 100, 200, even 400 point ELO gains in a single month. It's all verified. I have testimonials and so on. If you want to make that kind of progress, screaming fast progress, up to 400 ELO in a single month, kind of progress, going from 1,100 to 1,500 in the month of August 2025 alone. If you want those kinds of results, go to drmikechess.com. It's my free online chess community. Also, links down below in the description and so on. More on that at the very end of this video. All right, from here, Magnus, as promised, he plays a ludicrous idea. He plays the move rook to h3. Magnus freaking Carlsen, what on earth are you doing? The rook is under attack by the bishop. Of course, he knows this. He sees this. And he does it anyway. What is the idea? Well, first of all, Magnus here has the very, very concrete threat of simply capturing on h4 with the rook winning the piece. And black doesn't have an easy way to defend. For example, bishop f6 trying to defend the knight actually gets you checkmated with the move queen to h7 checkmate. So that would not be good at all. So black here, what can he do? What can he do in response to the threat of taking on h4? Well, obviously, he can take the rook, but Magnus here, he had all this calculated out. In the game, black takes the rook and white takes back with the bishop. Bishop takes h3. And now here, Magnus is officially down the exchange, but he's completely winning. He's about to simply obliterate his opponent. The idea is the bishop is going to fly in to the e6 square like this, hitting the king, and it's going to be an absolute monster on the light squares. Beyond that, the king will slide to h1 and the rook will slide to the g1 square. And from there, every single piece in Magnus Carlsen's camp, including the knight going to g5, is going to be swarming in on the black king, and black is going to be completely busted. I mean, the extra rook on a8 does not make any difference in this middle game with the attack on the black king. All right, black, rook to f6 is the move. Black here literally giving back the exchange to try and defend. The idea being, if white takes on f6, black takes back with the queen, and suddenly the queen is on an excellent square where it can defend the black king. But Magnus, he sees this and he simply ignores the idea of taking on f6. He does not want the rook. Oh no, instead, bishop to e6 hits the king, a very logical idea. Now, black, of course, has the option of giving back the exchange with rook takes e6. However, that would not relinquish the pressure. Magnus here would still be closing in on black. The pawn is now a powerful asset in the game. He's threatening ideas like e7 later, and beyond that, knight g5 is a very, very big threat right now, threatening queen to f7, queen to h7, and so on. Now, instead of that, in the game, Sina Mohammed, he plays the move king to f8, sliding over with the king, and now the rook is the only thing stopping black from getting checkmated in this game. Now, of course, if white takes the rook, black takes back with the queen, and black is still defending, and black is doing relatively okay. Now, instead of that, the move for Magnus, king to h1. Magnus Carlsen understanding in the attack, the most important rule of the attack is bring all of the pieces into the attack, and that includes the rook on the e1 square, which will slide over to the g1 square, pressuring along the g file, adding even more pressure into the attack. Black here, he tries to defend. Rook g6, sliding over, trying to guard the g-file, and the rook being very, very narrowly defended by the knight on the h4 square, and of course the knight by the queen on d8. I mean, everything here for black is just hanging on by a single thread. But Magnus, he continues anyway. Rook g1, piling up more pressure, trying to trade off a very critical defender of the black position. So, rook g1, the rook slides over, pressuring rook g6. Black here decides it is time to trade. Rook takes g1, king takes g1, and then queen to e8. Black here trying to trade queens, and if he can do that, keep in mind, black here, he's up the exchange. He has the extra rook versus the extra bishop, and if black can get into an endgame, he will be completely winning. But Magnus here, he does not trade queens, and instead, he simply takes on the h4 square. Queen takes h4, winning the piece. And now Magnus is the one up material with the ongoing attack. And of course, the rook on a8 continues to be completely out of the game. All right, black, queen g6, hits the king on g1. Magnus, king to f1. He slides over. It turns out the stronger idea for white, shockingly, is the move knight to g3. If you think you see why that is the right move right here, comment down below. It's a really, really shocking idea for white. So again, comment below if you see why this would be the best move here for Magnus. Instead, in the game, king to f1 played, a more human move. And black does take on e4, but the attack continues. Queen to h5, threatening checkmates on f7. And what can black do to defend against the threat? It turns out there's actually not very much he can do. For example, if the king goes to e7, then the mate is queen to f7, king to d8, and queen d7 is checkmates. So the king cannot move. What else can black do? It turns out no piece can defend the f7 square. Well, the queen can, but you lose the queen right away. Don't do that. So what can black do? The only thing he can do left in the game is simply deliver checks. He begins. Queen to h1, hitting the king. But it turns out this is the wrong check. Instead, queen takes c4 was the only way to have fighting chances in this game. And black would actually be okay, technically, according to the engine. Instead, queen to h1 played in the game, hitting the king. King to e2, queen to e4, hits the king. King d2, queen d4, hits the king. King e1, queen e4, hits the king. And now, bishop to e3. Sacrificing the bishop, but of course, if black takes the bishop, it's checkmate in one move. That is game over. So black cannot do that. But what else can he do in the game? Queen b1, hits the king. King to e2. Black has to give more and more checks. There's nothing else. Queen c2, it's the king again. King to f1. Queen takes c4, hits the king again. And now, the final move of the game, king g1. And would you have a look at this? The queen does not have any more checks. The sacrificed bishop controls the c1 square, stopping queen c1, and therefore black here does not have any way to deliver any more checks against the white king. And for that reason, given that black cannot defend against the checkmate threat of queen to f7 checkmates, black here is forced to resign on the spot to Magnus. And that is how Magnus simply obliterates the king's Indian defense as white using the classical variation, one of the oldest, most solid, and strongest lines for white, simply involving knight f3, bishop e2, and then short castles. His main weapon these days versus the king's Indian, based on all the games I've seen recently. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, show me some love. Smash the like button, comment down below, and so on. Do all those good things. And by the way, if you want to learn directly from me, a 2000 ELO online player, I do have a free online chess community where I can show you step-by-step everything I personally did to go from 1,100 ELO to over 2,000 ELO in 7 months on chess.com. And it does not matter what your rating is, whether you're a total beginner rated, say, 200 ELO, or a more advanced online player rated, say, I don't know, 1,500 ELO. Regardless of your rating, I can absolutely help you out and help you reach your online chess goals so much faster. So all you have to do, join my free online chess community, drmikechess.com. Links down below in the pinned comment and the description of this video. So it's all I got. As always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.